I've recently put out a manual for stick fighting for Kempo. And not for Kempo, but just in general. The idea is that it is a guide that doesn't unlock, doesn't do anything else. It just kind of highlights, essentially, potentially what we already have in our system. Or, again, similarities in concepts or principles between our system of Kempo and Filipino martial arts, for example, which is something I've studied for quite a while. But one of the things that always comes up is doubtlessly there will be some form of comment like, oh, the stick is just an extension of your hand, or the weapon is just an extension of your hand. And that's not untrue, eventually. But if we kind of boil that back a little bit and we take it back slightly and have a think about it, there are lots of things that are extensions of our hands throughout life, not just necessarily in martial arts. As kids, we learn to pick up things like crayons or pencils, and we scribble like crazy. So again, there's a tacit knowledge there that we should pick these things up. We can do things with them. We can draw with them. We can make pretty colors, pictures, or pictures in our own minds. And then as time goes on, we start to refine that through lessons, principles, techniques, other concepts. We go from script to cursive. We go through a lot of evolutions or variations in how we do things. It's why everyone has a different signature, for example. There's a personal flair to it as time goes on. But at the end of the day, how we hold a pen, how we hold a pencil, whatever it might be, the letters that we use, depending on the language, of course, to make up the words that we're writing, the cultural side of things. For example, my American viewers, you don't like the letter U in a lot of words like color, favor, or any of those, whereas here in Europe we do. So there are variations. But the thing is, calling anything an extension of your hand, yes, of course it's an extension of your hand. That doesn't necessarily mean you immediately know how to use it, no matter what knowledge you already have. And again, there are changes or variations based on the attributes of a weapon. I'll point out, for example, that a gun is typically an extension of your hand. But if you don't know how to use it from a technical standpoint, we all know how to squeeze a trigger, but that doesn't necessarily mean we know how to use a gun correctly. Again, there are lots of things. There are mechanisms we have to learn. There are different skill sets for how you would successfully unload a magazine, for example. There are skill sets as how you would rack an actual pistol or a rifle or whatever it may be. So, again, in all of these cases, yes, they're extensions of us, but there are lots more things to be learned. And that is through principles and other things that either we may know of or have any clue of at that point in time. So, to call something an extension is a very reductionist statement, especially when someone is sharing information, I find. And again, if I was to say, oh, well, that's just X, Y, or Z, and we already do it, yes, there's commonality of theme, especially in martial arts. There are commonality of principles. There's only so many ways you can move a body. However, when you start extending beyond your own body, you are now taking something else and need to take into account additional attributes, such as range. Range extends, as we know, when you put a stick in your hand. Force multiplication. If you take something like a knife, for example, you don't have to hit as hard or generate as much power as you would in an empty hand situation. So again, when I use that knife now, I don't have to load up in the same way that we would in some of our more empty hand techniques or to throw a punch in the same way. I have to learn to move differently. So yes, the extension of my arm is still there. I now have a little bit more range with a knife, and I have certainly multiplied my force output or potential force output. But if I don't know how to control that knife, if I don't take into account that turning that knife in the wrong way or using it in the wrong way or having it pinned against me and having my hand in the way, I can get hurt, damaged, or killed by that particular weapon, even if it is my own weapon. And the same thing comes again when we talk about pistols. You can use a firearm, but if that firearm is not secured in the right way, if you're not familiar with how to use it in the right way, it can be taken off you and used against you. So, again, I'm coming back to the point of we're talking about things being an extension of us. Yes, they are, but we still have to learn to use them. You still have to put it through a frame of reference that you already know, but it's not necessarily going to become second nature. And then to say to someone, if you look for it, you'll find the answers in your system. Well, yeah. But again, if you have to look for it, then you're going to need guidance. And that's the thing. If I'm at this for almost 40 years, sure, I can pull principles from other systems that I've studied and run them through the mill of Kempo, which I've studied since 6 years of age. So again, I can say it's all in there. I know how to do a wrist lock, I know how to do a finger lock, everything's already in Kempo. Well, the basics for it are there, the foundational concepts and principles are potentially there, but not the understanding of how certain parts of the body move or certain things in all cases. Again, it depends. What's your focus? And again, what's your school focused on? So if your school is able to teach every martial concept ever through the metric of Kempo, awesome. But again, if you're learning Kempo for Kempo's sake, there are things we forgo to focus on what Kempo does best. That doesn't mean you can't bring stuff in from other places. That doesn't mean that you can't extend your range or extend your range of techniques over that period of time or through additional training and additional focus. But there are some concessions that need to be made for other principles. This is why we do have different styles. This is why Filipino martial arts are excellent at what they do, because they start usually from a weapons-based focus first and then pair back to other weapons or empty hand applications and so on. So again, with Kempo, we start from the other side. We start from empty hand applications and then we put something extra in our hands. And let's be clear, the first time anyone puts a stick in their hand, be it Kempo, be it, the upper echelons of Kempo, Form 7, for example, they're not going to be as coordinated as they think they are with that stick. They're not going to be moving as well as they think they are. And let's be very clear, oftentimes they will just be doing Kempo with sticks in hand, not necessarily using the sticks as additional weapons or using the attributes of those sticks. They are probably just going to be doing Kempo by the numbers as the form is laid out, and eventually they will get comfortable with the weapon and they will learn it. So again, it's an extension of your hand, but that extension, you still need to learn how to use it. You still need to be able to draw comparisons to the principles that we already have and principles that we might need to take into account. As I said already, if we're talking about something like a knife, there are things around that knife. There are attributes. There are different dangers. There are different considerations to be made around that knife. And let's be fair. Again, being a 6th degree in Kempo, I think I can point it out. When we do Form 8 and we do finger set with those knives at the very start, there's a moment where we flip those blades around and we start punching with the butt of the knife, with the blades pointing towards us. So again, it's all in our system, but our system also has some things in there which don't fit well or need to be adjusted to suit the attributes of the weapon. So again, I'm not disputing the fact here that everything is an extension of the body. Of course, that is how we evolved. We learned to use tools. We learned to use weapons. We developed weapons over time for hunting, for gathering, for war, for whatever it was. We are not the same as we were back then, but there is still a learning curve that needs to be addressed when adding that extension to your body. So that's my thoughts on it as well. I'm not against the idea of everything being an extension of your body, but there are things that we're not very good at. My handwriting, for example, will be absolutely terrible. But those are just my thoughts on that. What do you think? Let me know.